Hi, my name is Jonathan with NetCheck Investigations. Thank you for joining in today. We have some great information for you. I hope it's going to help you and your friends and family. We're going to discuss and define domestic violence, the types of domestic violence, and more broadly, domestic abuse, and what are victim and abuser traits, how is it spread or where does it come from, and what kind of remedies and personality types might you consider. So first, we're going to define domestic violence as typically physical contact between people who are friends, relatives, spouses, and so forth, even neighbors, where there's great familiarity. And we like to actually use the term domestic abuse because abuse includes emotional misconduct, for example, controlling someone's communication, taking away their phone, taking away the car keys, not letting them talk to family. So domestic abuse is really the proper term, and that's the term we like to use. So let's do a little overview. What are the traits that are associated with abusers and with victims? So an abuser is defined as somebody who is instigating emotional or physical violence or control over another person, and victimization is typically the recipient of such. This kind of behavior, by the way, is not defined in a role forever. A lot of abusers also are victims, and a lot of victims are also abusers. So you can't label somebody as one or the other, and that's permanent. In fact, there's a fluid relationship and movement between victims and abusers all the time. In the United States, we tend to see victims as somewhat responsible for what people do to them. I'm not sure why that's in our culture. In some cultures, like in Japan, there's virtually no domestic abuse because it's unheard of. It's so bad. How would someone who's supposed to care for another person treat them improperly? There's a higher duty of respect to a partner or family member than there is to a stranger. In this country, in the United States, there's a greater respect for strangers, and the punishment criminally is much higher than if you take steps or measures against your family member. So for some reason it's backwards, and we don't like that, but that's the reality. Okay, so abusers and victims' roles we kind of understand. There are common traits for each. One primary trait for abusers is that they are not responsible or don't feel responsible for how they feel and what happens to them. If it's negative, they blame other people, and if it's positive, they blame themselves or accept responsibility. For abusers, this means that they aren't going to accept a need to change or a need to make it better because it's not their fault. For victims, unfortunately, a lot of victims are in healthcare, education, and the services where their primary function is helping other people, and that actually makes them very vulnerable. So in other words, the most vulnerable people are the nicest and sweetest and most loyal people. So victims tend to take on responsibility for how another person feels and tries to accommodate them, tries to make them better, tries to absorb their misconduct and take the blame themselves. And in fact, that dynamic of having an abuser wanting to blame a person and then a victim accepting blame is why the relationships are so hard to break up, because it meets both their needs. One for blaming other people and one for accepting blame. So, like I said, the nicest people tend to be victims, which is very unfortunate. Domestic abuse is actually spread person to person by observation or being involved in this situation. Even children as young as 3 months old hearing yelling and screaming in another room are affected, and their brains actually change. Medically, this has been proven, actually change when hearing or observing misconduct, even if they're only 3 months old. So if you think that children at home don't know what's going on or don't hear the yelling or screaming or not affected, actually it's not true. they are being imprinted upon and are very likely to be abusers and victims. In other words, domestic abuse is spread person to person like a disease, and the CDC, the U.S. Disease Control Office, states that domestic abuse is a transmissible disease. So if it was in human nature and equal everywhere, we'd say that's just the way people are. But in fact, we know country to country or neighborhood to neighborhood, domestic abuse varies in occurrence. Therefore, it is a transmissible or learned behavior. So let's go into the 5 basic traits of abusers. This is really important. Each kind of abuser trait is separate from each other, but usually they're in combination of 2 or 3. Most abusers have 2 or 3 traits, but let's know what they are. First of all, there is a stalking abusive behavioral trait, a sadistic trait, which means torturing or maiming or harming or inflicting pain on children, on pets, on spouses, on other people. There is a codependent trait, which is where they're addicted to or codependent upon emotional contact or drugs or alcohol. And emotional codependency is just as powerful as drugs or alcohol. There's a cycle of violence behavioral trait where there is a wonderful period, then tension, then an explosion or a fight or argument, and then the makeup. And with codependent individuals, it's all about making up and being reaccepted. So cycle of violence trait is about making up and being reaccepted. And then the controlling personality trait, where the person makes all the decisions, the victim has no right or no decision. They take away, or he or she takes away the car keys, the phone, doesn't let them work, locks them in a room. Very, very sad and very disappointing. So each combination of trait and each kind of trait has its own remedies and its own risk. So I'm going to go into a different video and explain each one separately for your convenience. If you'd like to know more, there is a book called Ending the Abuse, which we have available in our office. Let us know if that copy would be sent to you. Write to us at info@netcheckpi.com. And I wish you well. I hope this is helpful and helps illuminate some of the issues regarding domestic abuse, and please be safe. Thank you so much.